Alright, let's get it. Oh shit. Well, ain't about your business, fam. Oh, you right there. No one target.
Be here otherwise. Alright, Chip Cafe? I'll see you in a bit. Goodbye.
Niggas say follow him and keep you cool. Say less. Oh, that's so awkward. Oh! Come on, man. You know you're not buying shit.
According to intel, Mr. Cohn is hosting a private party behind those walls. Invite only, of course. Though I'm sure one of the guests could be persuaded to attend.
I can poison the hookah, that's funny.
You're behind on the rent of town. Look, I'm coming over. This can't continue. I don't care if you're busy. I'm not running a charity here. You're dragging me away from a very important party with a very important buyer. I'll meet you in your shop. Sorry, my building in a bit, okay? Bye. And I'm not leaving until you get paid. Why does this happen every time?
Today, I'm going to share 3 progressively more disturbing stories.
Hello, boss.
And at the end of each of them, I'm going to share the photo that is famously associated with them. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do. We upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please become a surgeon at the hospital located closest to where the like button lives. And then eventually, when the like button goes in for very minor outpatient surgery, accidentally perform a craniectomy on them. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's stories. Just after midnight on June 17, 1939, a crowd of people began to form outside of this unremarkable building in Versailles, which is a city in France. The atmosphere in this crowd was electric. They all knew why they were there. They knew what they were about to see, but even still, there was a lot of nervous anticipation. And so as such, some people were coping with these nerves by drinking alcohol and trying to laugh and have a good time, while others were subdued and were trying to be respectful about what they were about to witness. Between 1 and 2 a.m., the doors of this unremarkable building opened up, and a group of men dressed in the same dark uniforms came out and did say a word to the crowd, and the crowd immediately went silent and began to back away from them. And this group of men, they walked right out in front of this building, and all had tools with them, and they began constructing this kind of strange wooden structure.
I know. I fucked up. Come on, man. Come out your bed. He can't go ahead. He got a big ass gun. Oh man, they fucking cheating, dog.
Is it open?
I don't even know if I'm getting in yet. Yeah. So then she be honest.
They say you get in, so that's how you got seen.
To see what these guys were doing, but at the same time, they didn't want to get too close. And so as the crowd formed a sort of half moon around these men that were doing
This dude be old.
built this structure dozens of times before. It was just muscle memory. So by about 3 a.m., the structure was built.
Shut the fuck up.
This large capacity next to the structure. These men packed up the tools that were remaining for the lumber, turned around and went right back inside the doors into the building. At this point, the crowd had become quite sizable outside of this building, and they were growing restless because they knew now that the structure was built, that the next time those doors open, the show is really going to start. This spectacle they're all there for, it's about to happen. And the crowd all knew that this event couldn't happen if the sun was up. Because if the sun was up and the area was well lit, the press would be able to take pictures and film it. And that's not what officials wanted. They wanted this to happen in the darkness. But for whatever reason, things seemed to be getting delayed inside of this building. As the crowd was just getting more and more restless, people were getting more and more drunk, and they're getting louder and more disruptive and boisterous. And then around 4:45 a.m., the sun had come up, and the press went out and full force with their cameras pointing at the doors of this building. So the crowd really at this point is not actually expecting this event to take place. This one is totally getting on. What does he say? Those doors swung open, standing in the threshold was a 31-year-old Eugene Whiteman who was a convicted serial killer. His arms were tied behind his back, and the collar of his white shirt had been tucked down to the side because they needed his neck to be completely clear because he was about to be beheaded. So 2 guards on either side of Eugene, they pulled him forward out towards the crowd, so the executioners behind him who were dressed all in black could filter out and take up positions alongside the guillotine, which is that wooden structure that had been built earlier in the morning. And so as Eugene is being brought out towards the crowd, and
everything is getting set up for his execution, the crowd went wild, shrieking and howling and laughing and pointing and booing and just generally being completely rambunctious and totally bloodthirsty. Eugene kept his head down. He did not want to look at the crowd, and he did not want to look at the guillotine. So eventually the two guards turned him and walked him directly towards the base of the guillotine, at which point the executioners that had taken up their positions around this device, they grabbed him and slid him forward so he was on his stomach on top of this wooden platform, the guillotine. And they slid him forward until his head poked through this opening at the very far end, at which point his neck was positioned right under this huge blade that was dangling from above him, and his head was positioned over a metal bucket on the ground, which he would be looking directly at. At this point, the crowd was at a fever pitch, and one of the executioners pulled a lever. The blade came soaring down and removed his head. His head fell into the bin, and the executioners pushed his torso into the basket that had been placed out there earlier. And then the executioners and the prison guards, they gathered up Eugene's body parts and went right back inside the building, which was the prison. At this point, the crowd was cheering and going wild, and they ran up and began dabbing their scars of handkerchiefs in Eugene's blood on the ground as a sort of souvenir for having been at this execution. And of course, because the sun had been out for this entire spectacle, all of this had been captured on film. So later that day and the next couple of days, the headlines all over France were about this bloodthirsty crowd that was cheering as this man was beheaded, and just overall made France look really bad. And so French leaders decided that from that point forward, they could no longer do any public executions. So the guillotine would continue to get used for decades beyond this point, but it was all behind closed doors. Also, random fact about being beheaded by a guillotine: your head, after it's been separated from the body, stays conscious for about 10 to 12 seconds, so it's said. And apparently there's been lots of cases where the executioner, after the condemned has had their head removed, will yell the name of the person who has just had their head removed, and that person's head will look over at the person calling to them and will blink or try to mouth words for several seconds before the lack of oxygen kills the brain and the head is no longer conscious. Here are some of the more notable pictures that were used in the media from Eugene White's.
So I see it in my hand.
Oh.
Ooh.
How can you weigh the truth of a statement unless it's made under oath? Like Twitter. People on Twitter who are
In the early 1900s, Evan Byers was a man who othered envy. He was born into a very wealthy family in New York City. He attended Yale University in Connecticut, which is a very prestigious Ivy League university, and he was devilishly handsome. After his college graduation, he didn't need a job because his family was so rich, and so instead he focused his time on a passion of his, which was golfing. And in time, he became this world-class golfer, going so far as to win the 1906 U.S. Amateur Tournament, which is the biggest amateur golf tournament in the world that most of the winners go on to become professional golfers. And so Evan most likely would have followed that path and become a pro golfer had his father not just handed over a very successful metalworking business that he started that made his family wealthy in the first place. And so Evan stopped his golf career and became the chairman of this incredibly successful company. And so overnight, he basically went from being just rich to being uber rich, making more money than he could possibly spend. But Evan did attempt to spend his money. He pretty much immediately began buying up luxury properties all over the country. He bought horse racing stables in the United Kingdom and America, and he bought an entire luxury box at Forbes Field, which is where the Pittsburgh Pirates professional
Oh, I remember this place.
so in
It was a
addition to
different
owning
mission
all
on
these things,
one
Evan
point.
also, through his role as chairman of this company, began connecting with and befriending very powerful and influential people like the founders and executives at the Coca-Cola Company. And so all in all, Evan's life was really going quite well until 1927. That year, Evan was 47 years old, and he took some time off from gallivanting around the world and rubbing shoulders with famous people to go catch a football game at his alma mater at Yale University. So he hops on a train, he rides to Connecticut, he watches this game, and then afterwards he gets back on the train head back to Pittsburgh. And this is a very long ride. It's over 12 hours long. And so Evan naturally bought a first-class ticket. And so he was inside of a train car that had bunk beds for passengers to sleep on during the ride. So Evan climbed into a top bunk and he fell asleep. A few hours later, after the train is well on its way to Pittsburgh, Evan, in his sleep, manages to roll to the side of the bed and actually falls out of his bed onto the ground. He lands hard on his left side and wakes him up. And as he stands up, he thinks he's okay, but then he feels a shooting pain in his left arm. He puts his arm around, he's not really sure what's wrong with it, but he's hoping it's just some bruising. So he decides to be happy to his mom and just go back to sleep. He manages to fall asleep despite the pain. And then when they roll into the station in Pittsburgh several hours later, he wakes up. Right away, he feels that pain in his left arm. And so after getting off the train,
I saw it in the day they got the party.
he went right to his physical therapist's office to ask
She look
him
nice.
if there was anything he could do to help with the pain in his arm.
Oh, that's that bitch right there, one of them.
Shoulder and determined
Yeah, you motherfucker.
to his arm. But obviously, Evan is in pain. And so he says, look, there's a new product that came online that's quite expensive, but since you're a man of means, maybe it's something you want to consider. It's called Radithor, and it's supposed to dull aches and pains, and it's supposed to give you this huge boost of energy. So, maybe you want to try that. So Evan was really excited that he was taking this health tonic. He said, yeah, let's do it. And so his physical therapist wrote him a prescription for Radithor. Evan took the prescription and he went to the drugstore, picked up a half-ounce bottle of liquid, went back to his house, did as prescribed. He drank a very small spoonful of this liquid. And right away, he felt this surge of energy. The pain in his arm started to fade. All the things this health tonic claimed to be able to do, it was doing. And so over the next couple of days, Evan very diligently every day took the prescribed amount, a very small spoonful of this Radithor, and every day he felt better and better and better. Not just the pain in his arm, but overall he felt happier, he felt fitter, he felt alive, and he was attributing all those feelings to this miracle tonic. So he began taking more and more of his tonic, well beyond what was prescribed, to the point where he was drinking 3 full bottles of Radithor every single day. So for years he did this. It was all going great until his jaw fell off. Literally, in 1931, one day, his lower jaw just separated from his skull and went slack. And so the reason this happened was because Radithor was actually just radioactive water. In the early 1900s, the radioactive element, radium, was believed to have highly curative properties with no side effects. And so naturally, at the time, dozens of health products were created with radium being their main ingredient. And Radithor was one of those products. It was literally just water and radium. And so after consuming over 1,400 bottles of Radithor over a 3-year period, Evan's body was finally just starting to disintegrate from the inside out. After he had his jaw surgically removed, along with large portions of his upper jaw, the rest of his body also just began to crumble. And so by the end of 1931, when his story was making headlines all around the world about the dangers of Radithor, and really more specifically the dangers of radium, Evan had become completely bedridden, and his skull was now beginning to disintegrate. There were holes forming all over his skull that were exposing portions of his brain. So by 1932, Evan was dead. Evan was buried in Pittsburgh, and he was buried inside of a lead-lined coffin that was designed to absorb any of the radiation emitting from his bones. And then 30 years after he was buried, so in 1965, scientists actually exhumed his skeleton to see if it was still emitting radiation. And they determined it was still emitting the same levels of radiation as when
I'm gonna see if we're gonna use it.
they actually would
Because he
ultimately
left
found
it.
that radium, this radioactive element, has a half-life of 1,600 years. So what that means is Evan's body will remain highly radioactive for centuries. Here is a picture of Evan with his jaw surgically removed. It was taken shortly before he passed away.
Nathan, where are you?
Fuck he left.
It's a wedding day, remember? Yes, of course I'm here. Where are you? Babe.
There is still some debate about what exactly happened in this story that I'm about to share with you. And so for transparency, in this video, I am going to rely on the narrative that was presented in court by the defendant. So with that in mind, Here we go. On the afternoon of December 3rd, 2012, a freelance photographer working for the New York Post newspaper named Umar Abbasi was walking down the stairs of the 49th Street subway station in New York City. This very busy station is located a few blocks away from the very famous Times Square.
Oh shit, yeah, you better go in there. That's one of the targets. Oh, he going in there. Oh man, you know it. You gotta use it.
He walked over to the turnstiles, he slid his ticket through the slot, pushed past the turnstiles, and was now standing out on the actual train platform. And from where
I think it's to the bad dude that I have a chance to kill him or something. Oh look, he fucked up. I don't know what about the rest of you about to find. Yeah, but they ain't niggas that realistic. Fuck, that's the body girl.
Sir, this is a restricted area.
Oh fuck, how bad to restricted? Yeah, but it was still restricted bad otherwise, I feel.
No, sir, I can't let you through here.
God damn.
New orders. I'm sorry.
That's probably should have to do with him.
I know, he left mine. But then maybe I'll come back.
Sir, you can't go through here. Please turn around.
Hey!
No.
Fuck. You said that too. I swear to God, if he killed me, now he ain't see me for real this time. He walked off. I was still trying to try to deceive it. You ever know? Think about it. He was like, bro, was the heights of it. This ain't metal gun. Like a bitch. Fuck. Should I get him? Yep. Bam. I am.
Hands up.
See? Yeah.
My damn nerves.
Genius. Barely, but a genius.
Basically, it was like a huge sidewalk that stretched all the way to his right a couple hundred feet and all the way to his left a couple hundred feet. And in front of this platform were the actual tracks down below, because the train, when it came out of the tunnel, it would actually come right up alongside the platform with almost no clearance between the platform and the train. As such, the leading edge of the platform, basically the lip that's closest to the train tracks has this big yellow line painted all across it to keep commuters from standing too close to the edge, because if the train came through, they could actually get hit by the train. And so as Umar is standing on this platform and he's looking left and right, it's totally crowded with people, and they're all kind of tucked back against the wall away from this yellow line. And so Umar decides he's going to turn right and wait at the right end of the platform, because he saw down at the far end, there appeared to be a gap. People in the van stand right there. And so Umar begins navigating past all of these people on the right side of the platform. And for the most part, everyone he's passing either has their head buried in their phone, or they're listening to music, or both. Because the thing about riding trains, especially trains in busy cities, is none of the commuters want to talk to anybody else. They want to be completely left alone. And so as Umar is walking, everyone was basically doing this.
I don't know, but I know certain areas I'm suspicious, so I gotta keep moving.
Pretty heated conversation. Umar had no idea.
Yeah, I want him following me.
Arguing at all. He didn't know who these people were, but he took mental note of the fact that two men were kind of bickering with each other. So he walked past them, didn't give it much of a second thought, and he arrived at a gap in the gaggle of people waiting for the train, and there he just stood well back of the yellow line, where he pulled out his camera and began clicking through the images he had taken earlier in the day at a career photo shoot. And so as he's clicking through these pictures, he starts to notice that those two men who had been bickering before are now straight up yelling at each other. They're screaming obscenities at each other. It's not clear who's fighting about what or who is the aggressor, but it's very obvious that at this point they're fighting. And so Umar looked away from his camera and looked left down the platform towards these two guys. So these two guys are about 100 to 125 feet away from him. And all the people that were standing in the vicinity of these two men are beginning to migrate away from them. They just don't want anything to do with them. Because the thing about being in subways, especially in cities like New York, is there's lots of people that go down into these train stations that are inebriated or mentally unstable. And so very strange and bad behavior is just kind of a normal thing. People tend to just kind of ignore it. And so that's what's happening. People are kind of walking away from these two fighting men, doing their best to pretend it's not happening. And so Umar spent a couple more seconds staring down the platform at these two men, but eventually just shrugged and thought, you know what, whatever problems they have, they're not mine. And so Umar went back to his camera and continued to click through his pictures, when all of a sudden he hears a scream coming from the left side of the platform. But it was not a scream that sounded like it came from either of these two men. And so Umar looked up from his camera and looked left down the platform, and now he just sees chaos. There's people running away from these two men. People are running to get away from whatever is happening around them. And so Umar's thinking these men must have come to blows, and they're now fighting actively, physically with each other. But when finally the crowd kind of cleared for a second, he saw a woman pointing down at the train tracks right in front of where those two men had been standing. And so Umar looks at the woman and he follows her finger down onto the tracks, and he sees there is now a man, one of the two men who had been fighting, laying face down on the train tracks. And then, to Umar's horror, he looks up down the tunnel where the train would come out of, and he sees the headlights of the train is now coming into the station. And so Umar starts running down the platform to try to get to this man and pull him out of the tracks. And as he's running, he pulls out his camera, and he turns the flash on, and he holds the shutter down, and he aims it at the train conductor to hope the flashing of his camera will alert the train conductor to put on the emergency brake and stop the train before he hits this guy down on the tracks. And so as Umar is running, trying to signal this train conductor, the man down on the tracks tries to stand up.
So my sister met this customer. Really stood out.
Hey, why can't I date your sister? She's gorgeous.
Because it's my sister. Now, she told me something odd.